To be honest, self-improvement, it could feel like, I don't know, a battlefield sometimes. So much advice coming at you from every direction, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Like you're supposed to become this perfectly optimized, super productive machine,
Yeah.
but then, life happens.
Yeah.
You lose that initial, burst of motivation, and you're right back where you started. Just with me.
Totally.
That's why I am so excited about today's deep dive, because we're going to explore a book that approaches all this in a completely different way,
Oh.
a way that feels a lot more, well, human. The book is Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, yeah. Atomic Habits. That's a good one. One of those books that really sticks with you.
It's funny because Atomic Habits doesn't exactly scream self-help, does it?
Yeah.
It's more like intriguing, maybe even a bit mysterious. So I got to ask, where did that title come from? And what does it even mean?
Well, it all goes back to this idea of tiny changes, these small, almost invisible actions. See, James Clear wasn't always a self-help guru. He was actually an athlete, fascinated by how these consistent small improvements, they could make all the difference between, winning and losing.
Right.
He started to think about habits the same way, like these building blocks that when you stack them together can create huge results, hence atomic habits.
It's like that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see why this book has connected with so many people. It's about these subtle shifts in our daily routines, the
Yes.
1% improvements.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the big things Atomic Habits stresses is, these tiny changes, it's not just about adding new stuff to your day, it's about getting rid of those negative patterns too.
Mm.
There's this quote from the book, I think it really gets to the heart of it. Success is the product of daily habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations.
It's not about that, magic solution or the overnight fix. It's about those consistent daily actions, those small steps, and how over time they can completely change your life.
Exactly. It's about that consistency. And that's where Clear introduces his 4 laws of behavior change.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for us. What are these 4 laws?
All right. So the 4 laws are make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
Okay.
He argues that if you want to build a good habit, you got to make it obvious. Like, put your running shoes right by the door so you can't miss them. To make it attractive, maybe pair it with something you enjoy, like listening to your favorite podcast while you run. Then to make it easy, maybe just start with a 5-minute jog. And finally, to make it satisfying, track your progress or give yourself a little reward.
So it's not about white-knuckling your way through it. It's about, setting yourself up for success, making those good choices almost effortless.
Exactly. And the book, it really dives into each of these laws, gives you specific strategies to actually use them in your life. It's all about becoming the architect of your habits, right? Like designing your environment to help you reach your goals.
So we've got these tiny changes, these atomic habits. We've got the 4 laws. Now, tell me a little bit about the structure of the book itself. What are the key takeaways you think people should know before jumping in?
Well, the book's divided into 4 main sections, and each one builds on the one before it. It starts with the fundamentals, where he lays out those basic principles of habit formation, introduces the 4 laws we just talked about.
So laying the groundwork, like getting into the nitty-gritty of how habits actually work.
Yeah, exactly. Then he moves into the first law, make it obvious, where he really gets deep into how important cues are and how you can design your environment to trigger those habits you want.
So being intentional with your surroundings, making those good choices more visible.
Exactly. Then, in the second law, make it attractive, he explores motivation and reward and how they play into forming habits. This is where you learn to make those good habits more appealing and how to use this thing called temptation bundling to your advantage.
Okay, that sounds super useful.
It is. And then the last section, the third and fourth laws, make it easy, make it satisfying. That one focuses on reducing friction and increasing those rewards to make those habits stick for good.
So it's like a step-by-step guide, taking you from, understanding the science behind habits all the way to making those lasting changes.
Exactly. And throughout the book, you'll find all these incredibly insightful quotes and real-life examples that just make the concepts even more powerful.
I noticed in our prep notes you highlighted 3 quotes. You said they really kind of shifted your thinking. Would you mind sharing those with us?
Sure. The first one is, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. That one was huge for me because it really highlighted how important it is to build those systems, those routines and environments that support the habits you want.
So it's not just about willpower. It's about putting those structures in place that help you succeed.
Exactly. Then there's this one. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. That one really got me thinking about how my habits and my identity are connected. It's like every time I make a choice, I'm shaping the person I want to be.
Ooh, I love that one. It's like a reminder that our habits, they're more than just like actions. They really reflect who we are.
Exactly. And the last one that really struck me was success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out. This one's a great reminder that real change, it doesn't come from some big dramatic gesture. It comes from those consistent everyday actions.
It's like you're building a mosaic, putting down those tiny tiles one by one until eventually you have this beautiful work of art.
That's a perfect analogy.
So I'm sensing a theme here. It's not about those drastic overnight transformations. It's about those small tweaks you make consistently every single day.
Exactly. And that's what Atomic Habits gives you the tools to do.
Okay, I think we've laid a great foundation. We understand the idea of atomic habits. We know how the book is structured. We've even gotten a taste of some of those thought-provoking quotes. But before we get into the specifics, I want to know more about what makes this book so special. Why should someone, and I'm talking to you listening right now, why should you pick up Atomic Habits?
That's a great question. I think what sets Atomic Habits apart is how practical it is. Clear doesn't just talk about these concepts in this vague way. He gives you real, concrete strategies, stuff you can start doing today.
So it's not one of those books you finish feeling all inspired, but then you're like, okay, now what?
Exactly. It's like having a toolbox full of useful tools for changing your habits. He tells you exactly what to do, why it works, and even gives examples of people who've used these techniques successfully.
He breaks it down in this step-by-step way that makes it feel doable, even for people who, might feel kind of overwhelmed by the whole self-improvement thing.
Exactly. It's empowering. Another thing that makes this book so great is that it's not just about achieving some goal, some external thing. It's about becoming the kind of person you want to be, about your habits, matching your values.
It's about creating a life that feels authentic and fulfilling, right? I
Exactly.
can really see why this book has become so popular. It's not just about checking off boxes on a list. It's about those changes that really matter, the ones that make a difference in every area of your life. Now, you mentioned that the book provides specific strategies for changing your habits. Can you give us an example? Like you talked about temptation bundling earlier. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. So temptation bundling, it's this really clever technique. It's where you link something you want to do with something you need to do.
I'm always up for finding ways to make those need-to-dos a little more fun. Give us an example.
Okay, so let's say you love listening to podcasts, right? But you struggle to make time for walks. Well, you could bundle those two activities. Only let yourself listen to your favorite podcasts when you're out walking.
So you're turning something you enjoy into a reward for doing something that might not be as naturally, pleasurable.
Hmm.
Genius. Okay, what other strategies does Clear offer? In the outline, you mentioned habit stacking. What is that?
Habit stacking is all about using those routines you already have. The
Yeah.
idea is to attach a new habit you're trying to build to an existing habit that you're already doing.
Okay, walk me through that. How would that work in real life?
Let's say you want to start a daily gratitude practice, but you're not sure where to fit it in. Well, you could habit stack it with something you do every morning, like brushing your teeth. So right after you brush your teeth, you take a moment to think of 3 things you're grateful for.
So you're like piggybacking on an existing habit, making it easier to adopt that new behavior. Like it creates this chain reaction of positive actions.
Exactly. And Atomic Habits is full of practical strategies like this. It's all about making habit change, achievable, maybe even enjoyable, instead of this big, scary thing.
I like that. It's not about forcing yourself to do things you hate. It's about getting creative and finding ways to make those good choices feel effortless.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons Atomic Habits works so well. It takes the science of habits and turns it into things you can actually do to improve your life.
I'm really starting to see how powerful this approach can be. It's about those little strategic wins,
Yeah.
adding up over time to create amazing results.
Now, we've talked a lot about the practical stuff, but there's another part of the book that I find fascinating, and that's this focus on identity. You said one of those quotes that hit you hard was, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Can you explain that a little more? What does it mean to build habits from a place of identity?
That is a great question. It's definitely one of the most powerful ideas in the book. Clear says that real change It starts with a shift in identity. It's not about what you want to achieve. It's about who you want to become.
So instead of saying, I want to write a book, I might say, I'm a writer.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this. But how does that translate into building those better habits?
Well, it starts with paying attention to the stories you're telling yourself,
Yeah.
about who you are and what you can do. Are those stories helping you or are they holding you back?
So if I keep telling myself I'm not a morning person, that belief is going to make it really hard to like establish a morning routine, right?
Exactly. The things you believe shape the things you do. So if you want to change your habits, you often got to start by changing the way you see yourself.
So it's about stepping into the identity of the person you want to become, and then your habits will follow naturally, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. And Atomic Habits provides a framework for making that shift.
This is also insightful. It's making me rethink my whole approach to habits. It's not just about forcing myself to do things. It's about understanding those forces that shape my behavior and then, using that knowledge to create real change. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one more thing I want to touch on, and that's environment design.
Ah, yes. Environment design. It's so important for making positive changes stick.
I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Claire argues that the environment around us, it has a huge influence on how we act. So we need to create spaces that support our goals, the habits we want to build.
So I'm trying to eat healthier. I need to make sure my kitchen is stocked with healthy foods and the junk food is out of sight.
Exactly. It's about making the healthy choice the easy choice. And the unhealthy choice, well, harder.
I'm noticing a pattern here. It's all about setting yourself up for success, taking away those temptations and roadblocks that might derail your efforts.
Exactly.
We've covered so much already, and I'm feeling inspired to start making some changes. But this is just the beginning.
There's still so much more to uncover in Atomic Habits. In this next part of our deep dive, we're going to dig into some of those more nuanced strategies that Clear offers. And we'll talk about how you can actually apply these ideas in your own life.
Okay, you've definitely got me hooked. I'm ready to go deeper.
Yeah.
One thing that really stood out to me was how Clear emphasizes, like, it's not just about setting goals, it's about systems.
Right.
It's about those underlying habits,
Yeah.
the ones that ultimately support whatever you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. And one of those powerful tools for building systems, and one that Clear talks a lot about in the book, is habit tracking.
I have to admit, I've always been a little bit, I don't know, skeptical of habit tracking.
Really?
Yeah. It just feels like one more thing to add to my already overflowing to-do list.
I get it.
But I'm open to hearing why Clear thinks it's so important.
It's not about adding more to your plate, it's about awareness. When you track your habits, you become more conscious of what you're actually doing.
Okay.
You start to see patterns,
Yeah.
You see where you're doing great and you can pinpoint those moments where you might be slipping up.
So it's like having this personal scorecard, right?
Sure.
It shows you exactly where you're at, if you're making progress or if you need to, change your approach.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy.
Okay.
It could be as simple as marking an X on a calendar every day that you do the habit you're trying to build.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can use one of those habit tracking apps. There are tons of them out there.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not about, adding pressure. It's about creating accountability and self-awareness.
Exactly. And there's something about seeing those X's, stack up day after day.
Yeah.
It's like visual proof that you're making progress,
Yep.
even if it's just one tiny step at a time.
So it's not just about tracking the habit, it's about tracking the progress,
Right.
which can be, really motivating. It helps you stay on track.
Precisely. And there's a quote from the book that I think sums it up perfectly. When you can measure your progress, you stay motivated to keep going.
I like that. Okay, you've got me sold on habit tracking. Now, what about those times when we, slip up? What does Atomic Habits say about dealing with setbacks and getting back on track?
That's such a good question because, we all slip up.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect. And Clear, he totally gets that. In fact,
Yeah.
he has a whole section of the book dedicated to how to get back on track when you mess up.
Okay, that's good to hear. I was kind of worried this book would be all about, striving for perfection, which, let's face it, is just not realistic.
Not at all. Claire's big on this idea of resilience, bouncing back quickly when you do slip up. He calls it the never miss twice rule.
Never miss twice. I like that. It's like a mantra for those moments when you feel like you've totally fallen off the wagon.
Exactly. And he gives some really helpful advice on how to actually use this rule. One thing he suggests is, actually scheduling your habits into your day.
Okay.
just like you would an appointment or a meeting.
Right.
It makes them non-negotiable, so you're less likely to skip them.
That makes sense. It's like you said before, taking the guesswork out of it, making those good choices,
Yeah.
like more automatic. Any other tips for getting back on track?
Another thing he talks about is starting small, especially after a setback. It's easy to get discouraged and try to do a ton all at once to make up for lost time, but, that usually doesn't work.
Oh, I've definitely been there.
Yeah,
You miss a few workouts, and then you try to cram in a week's worth of exercise in one day, and you just end up feeling exhausted and defeated.
exactly. It's much better to just focus on getting back on track with the habit,
Right.
even if it's just for a few minutes. The key is to break that cycle of missed opportunities and start building momentum again.
It's about those small wins, reminding yourself that you're capable of doing it, even after you've, slipped up. It's about progress, not perfection.
Precisely. And another strategy Clear talks about is creating an environment that supports your habit. So that might mean getting rid of temptations, rearranging your space, or even just surrounding yourself with people who encourage you.
It's like we were talking about before with habit tracking, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about setting yourself up for success.
Mhm.
It's not just about willpower. It's
Yeah.
about creating those external supports that make it easier to stay on track.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about becoming some perfect, superhuman version of yourself. It's about those small, consistent changes that lead to a healthier, happier life.
One thing I really appreciate about Atomic Habits is that it acknowledges that change can be hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
It acknowledges that there will be setbacks, there will be moments of resistance, and it gives you those tools to navigate those challenges.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so useful. It's not just a bunch of inspirational quotes, it's a real guide to making lasting change.
I can really see why so many people have connected with this book. It's relatable, it's actionable, and it gives you that hope. Like even small changes can have a huge impact. Now, you mentioned earlier that the book is broken down into these 4 sections. We talked about the fundamentals, and we touched on some of the strategies from the other sections. But I'm curious to hear more about that second section, the first law, make it obvious. What are some of the key takeaways from that section?
So, in the first law, make it obvious, Clear really digs into the importance of cues, those triggers that start a habit.
Okay.
He argues that to make a habit stick, you got to make the cue for that habit obvious, like impossible to miss.
Okay, I'm with you so far. Give me an example, like how would that work in real life?
Okay, let's say you're trying to drink more water throughout the day.
Okay.
Instead of just telling yourself to drink more water, you could use something Clear calls implementation intentions. It's basically creating a specific plan for when and where you'll do the habit. So you might say to yourself, when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I'll do is drink a full glass of water. You're making the cue, waking up, super obvious, and linking it to the action, drinking water. And that makes you more likely to actually do it.
It's like creating this, like a mental shortcut.
Yeah.
So the desired behavior becomes automatic, like a response to that trigger.
Exactly. And Clear actually gives you a formula for writing these implementation intentions. It goes like this. I will behavior at time and location.
Mm.
So another example could be, I will meditate for 10 minutes at 7 p.m. in my living room.
Okay, I'm starting to see how powerful this could be for establishing those new routines. It's about taking out the guesswork,
Right.
making those good choices more automatic. Any other strategies from that section that you'd highlight?
Another one that Clear recommends is habit stacking, which we touched on earlier. It's all about linking a new habit to one you already have. So like if you want to start flossing every day, you could stack it with brushing your teeth. Right after you brush, you floss.
So you're using an existing habit, something you're already doing consistently, to trigger that new habit.
Exactly. And the more you repeat that sequence, the stronger that connection gets, until eventually flossing just becomes part of your toothbrushing routine.
Like it creates this chain of positive actions,
Yeah, exactly.
one building on the next.
Yeah.
I like that. Are there any other strategies from this section worth mentioning?
One more I think is really helpful is environment design, which we talked about a bit earlier. Clear's big on this idea that our environment plays a huge role in our behavior.
So it's about being mindful of your surroundings
Yeah.
and making sure they actually support the habits you're trying to build.
Exactly. So, for example, if you're trying to cut back on screen time, maybe make your phone less accessible,
Right.
Like put it in a drawer or even leave it in another room. On the other hand, if you want to read more, make sure you always have a book within reach, maybe on your bedside table or in your bag.
It's about making those good choices more visible and those tempting distractions, well, less so.
Precisely. And it's not just about physical stuff. It applies to your digital environment, too.
Hmm.
Like, if you're trying to use social media less, log out of your accounts, or maybe even delete the apps from your phone.
So it's about taking control of your environment, both physical and digital. To make those positive changes stick,
Hmm.
I'm really seeing how all these strategies work together,
Yeah. Yeah.
to create this powerful system for changing your habits.
Exactly. It's not just about willpower or motivation. It's about understanding how habits work and then, like, designing your environment and your routines to support you.
This is all so insightful. It's really making me think about, like, the subtle ways our environment shapes our choices. Now, I know we have a lot more to unpack, but I'm already feeling inspired to start implementing some of these ideas. Before we jump to the next section, though, I'm curious about how these strategies could be used in different areas of life. We've talked about examples related to, health and productivity, but how could these principles be used to improve relationships, for example?
That's a great question. I think one of the most powerful ways to apply these principles to relationships is through small gestures.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Think about those 4 laws of behavior change again. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. You can actually use those to strengthen your relationships, just by focusing on these small, consistent acts of love and appreciation.
I love that idea. Can you give me a specific example of how that might look?
Sure. So let's say you want to show your partner that you appreciate them more often. Instead of waiting for, like, special occasions, focus on those everyday moments. Leave them a little note in the morning, make their coffee just the way they like it, or even just take a few minutes to really listen when they're talking about their day.
Those are such great examples.
Yeah.
And they're all things you can easily fit into your daily routine.
Exactly. And those little things, done consistently, over time, they can have a huge impact on your relationship.
It's about shifting your focus, right?
Yeah.
From those big, grand gestures to those everyday acts of love and kindness.
Exactly. It's about building those positive habits into the fabric of your relationship.
I'm really starting to see how these principles can be used in any area of life where you want to create positive change. It's about understanding how habits work and then using that knowledge to design your environment, your routines, and even your relationships in a way that supports you. Now, I know we've covered a lot, but we've only just scratched the surface of Atomic Habits.
Mm-hmm.
In this last part of our deep dive, we're going to explore the rest of Atomic Habits and unpack some of those more nuanced strategies for making those changes that really stick. I'm ready if you are.
Sounds good. We were talking about how you could use the ideas in Atomic Habits to improve your relationships. So, building on that, let's jump into the second law, make it attractive. This section dives into the role of motivation and reward. Clear says we're more likely to stick with habits that we actually enjoy, the ones that feel rewarding.
Okay, that makes sense. We're programmed to seek pleasure and avoid pain. But how do we make those healthy habits, the ones that might not be so fun on their own, how do we make them more appealing?
That's where temptation bundling comes in. Like we talked about earlier, it's all about linking something you want to do with something you need to do. Like letting yourself watch your favorite show only when you're on the treadmill.
Right. It's all about finding those creative ways to make those less enjoyable tasks more, well, enjoyable. Any other strategies from this section that you want to highlight?
Another technique that Clear talks about is habit shaping. It's starting with a really tiny, easy version of the habit and then slowly making it more challenging as you go.
So instead of trying to run a marathon on day one, I might start by just walking around the block.
Exactly. The idea is to make that first step so easy that you can't say no. And then as you get more consistent, you gradually increase the challenge.
It's like building those mental muscles,
Yeah.
slowly but surely, until you can handle those bigger challenges. Okay, so what about the third law? Make it easy. What's the focus there?
In the third law, make it easy, Claire's all about reducing that friction, making those habits you want as effortless as possible.
Okay, I like the sound of that. Low effort, high impact, that's what we're all about. So what are some specific techniques for making habits easier?
One of the best is what he calls the 2-minute rule. It basically says you should break any new habit down into a version that takes 2 minutes or less to start.
So instead of trying to write a whole chapter of my book, I might just commit to writing for 2 minutes.
Exactly. It's all about getting over that initial hurdle, making that first step so easy you can't resist. And a lot of times you'll find that once you start, you just keep going.
It's like you're tricking your brain to taking action.
Yeah.
And once you're moving, it's easier to stay in motion, right?
Precisely. It's a simple but really effective way to build momentum and stop procrastinating.
Okay, this is great. It's about those little wins, right?
Yeah.
Those tiny victories that give you confidence and keep you going.
Exactly. And another thing Clear recommends in this section is to set up your environment in a way that makes those good habits as easy as possible. Like, if you want to work out in the morning, lay out your clothes the night before. If you want to eat healthier, make sure you have healthy snacks ready to go.
It's about removing those obstacles, those little points of friction that might, trip you up.
Exactly. It's about making the right choices the easiest choices.
Okay, so we've got make it obvious, make it attractive, and make it easy. What about the fourth law? Make it satisfying. What's the main takeaway there?
The fourth law, make it satisfying, focuses on reward. Clear's point is that we tend to repeat things that feel good, that give us a positive experience.
Okay, so it's about that feeling of accomplishment that comes with doing something positive, that sense of gratification.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a big, fancy reward. It could be something small, like checking off a habit on your tracker, giving yourself a mental high five, or even just taking a moment to appreciate how good it feels to follow through.
It's about celebrating those wins, no matter how small.
Exactly. And one of the most effective ways to make a habit feel satisfying is, you guessed it, tracking your progress. Like we discussed earlier, it not only makes you more aware of your actions, but it also gives you that sense of accomplishment.
It's like visual proof that you're making progress,
Yeah.
right? Even if it's just one tiny step at a time.
Exactly. And another strategy Clear recommends is to find ways to make the habit itself enjoyable. So if you're trying to get into working out, pick activities you actually like. Don't force yourself to do things you hate just because you think you should.
Right. It's all about finding that sweet spot where your passions and your goals overlap.
Exactly. When you find that sweet spot, it's not about forcing yourself anymore. It's about giving yourself permission to do something you love.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. We've explored atomic habits, broken down those four laws of behavior change, and even talked about some really powerful strategies for making real, lasting changes. But before we go, I want to bring it back to the listener, to you. We've covered a lot, and it might feel a little overwhelming, like where do I even start? So you could pick just one thing, one small action for our listeners to take away from this deep dive. What would it be?
That's a great question. If I had to pick just one thing, I'd say start small. Don't try to change everything all at once. Pick one little habit you want to start or one you want to stop and just focus on that. Once you've got that down, then you can move on to the next thing.
It's about those baby steps, those small wins that build your confidence and create momentum for lasting change, right?
Exactly. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent. Keep taking those small steps day after day, and before you know it, you'll have made some pretty amazing changes in your life.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into atomic habits. It's been fantastic exploring this book with you.
I've really enjoyed it.
And to our listener, we hope you found this deep dive helpful and inspiring. Remember, even the tiniest changes, when you do them consistently, can have a huge impact on your life. So go out there, embrace the power of atomic habits, and start building the life you want, one small step at a time.